When America declared independence in 1776, it proclaimed that all men are created equal. But this promise had a dark exception: slavery. From the very beginning, our nation was split between states that allowed slavery and those that banned it. The original Constitution never said the word slavery, but it was written into the framework of our government. The Three-Fifths Compromise counted enslaved people as three-fifths of a person for representation purposes. The Fugitive Slave Clause meant that enslaved people who escaped to free states weren't actually free, they remained enslaved. By 1860, nearly 4 million people lived in bondage in the southern states. The North had gradually abolished slavery, but the South's economy depended on it. This fundamental division would tear the nation apart. The question wasn't just moral, it was about power. Every new state joining the Union shifted the balance in Congress. Would they be slave states or free states? This single question dominated American politics for decades. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, Southern states saw it as the end of their way of life. They seceded, formed the Confederate States of America, and the Civil War began. What started as a war to preserve the Union would become a war to end slavery forever. On January 1, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-controlled areas were free. It was a revolutionary moment, but it had serious limitations. The proclamation only applied to states in rebellion. It didn't free enslaved people in border states that remained loyal to the Union, like Kentucky and Delaware. It was also a wartime measure, issued under Lincoln's presidential war powers. What would happen when the war ended? Could the next president simply reverse it? Could the Supreme Court declare it invalid? Lincoln knew the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't enough. Freedom needed to be permanent, written into the Constitution itself, where no president or court could touch it. But getting a constitutional amendment was incredibly difficult. It needed two-thirds approval in both the Senate and House, then ratification by three-fourths of the states. In a divided nation at war, this seemed almost impossible. Still, Lincoln and his allies in Congress began the fight. Representative James Mitchell Ashley of Ohio introduced the first proposal in December 1863. Senator John B. Henderson of Missouri submitted another version. The Senate Judiciary Committee, led by Lyman Trumbull of Illinois, worked to merge these proposals into one powerful amendment. The text they created was simple and direct, borrowing language from the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. On April 8, 1864, the Senate passed the amendment with a vote of 38-6. It was a huge victory, but the real fight was just beginning. 2 months later, on June 15, the House of Representatives voted and failed. The vote was 93 in favor, 65 against, falling 13 votes short of the required two-thirds majority. Democrats opposed it, arguing it violated states' rights and would lead to full citizenship for Black Americans. Lincoln made the amendment a centerpiece of his 1864 re-election campaign. When he won decisively that November, he saw it as a mandate from the American people. Now he had to turn that victory into votes. What followed was one of the most intense lobbying efforts in American history. Lincoln personally met with individual congressmen, making emotional appeals. His Secretary of State, William Seward, had a fund for direct bribes, offering government jobs and campaign money to Democrats willing to switch their votes. The president's supporters worked every angle. Representative Thaddeus Stevens later admitted that the greatest measure of the 19th century was passed by corruption aided and abetted by the purest man in America. On January 31, 1865, the House voted again. The gallery was packed. Black observers who had only recently been allowed to attend congressional sessions watched from above. When the final tally came 119-56, the chamber erupted. Representatives wept openly, people embraced. The galleries cheered. After years of bloodshed and struggle, Congress had voted to end slavery forever in America. Lincoln signed the resolution on February 1, 1865, though his signature wasn't technically required. It was sent to the states for ratification. For the amendment to become part of the Constitution, 27 of the 36 states needed to ratify it. The question was, would Southern states cooperate? The Northern states moved quickly. Illinois ratified first on February 1, 1865. Rhode Island, Michigan, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia followed within days. By the end of February, 18 states had approved it. Then came April 14, 1865, the night Lincoln was assassinated. He never lived to see his greatest achievement completed. The new president, Andrew Johnson, took a different approach. He personally oversaw the creation of new state governments throughout the South, pushing them to ratify the amendment as a condition of rejoining the Union. Southern states were in a difficult position. They had lost the war, and ratifying the amendment seemed like the price of peace. But many added their own interpretations, claiming that Congress couldn't use the amendment to give Black people civil rights. Alabama ratified on December 2, 1865. North Carolina followed on December 4. On December 6, 1865, Georgia became the 27th state to ratify. Secretary of State William Seward certified the amendment on December 18, 1865. The 13th Amendment was now part of the Constitution. Slavery was illegal throughout the United States. But not every state ratified quickly. Delaware didn't ratify until 1901. Kentucky waited until 1976. Mississippi didn't officially ratify until 1995 and didn't certify that ratification until 2013, nearly 150 years after the amendment was adopted. The 13th Amendment made slavery illegal, but it didn't make Black Americans equal. In fact, it contained a loophole that would be exploited for generations. Except as a punishment for crime, Southern states immediately began passing Black codes, laws designed to control formerly enslaved people. Mississippi led the way with an 1865 law ironically titled, An Act to Confer Civil Rights on Freedmen. This law required Black workers to sign yearly contracts with white farmers or face arrest for vagrancy. Other laws made it a crime for Black people to be unemployed, to speak loudly, to sell cotton after sunset, or to gather in groups. The punishment? Forced labor. Historian Douglas Blackman called this an array of interlocking laws essentially intended to criminalize Black life. Thousands of Black Americans were arrested for minor offenses and sentenced to work on plantations, in mines, in lumber camps, essentially recreating slavery under a new name. Convict leasing? Meanwhile, peonage systems trapped workers in endless debt. Employers would advance money to workers, then use that debt to force them to keep working indefinitely. It resembled slavery in almost every way except it wasn't officially hereditary. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in 1935, "Slavery was not abolished even after the 13th Amendment. There were 4 million freedmen and most of them on the same plantation, doing the same work they did before emancipation." Congress tried to fight back with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the Freedmen's Bureau, and additional constitutional amendments, the 14th and 15th. But as federal troops withdrew from the South and political will faded, these protections weakened. For decades, the 13th Amendment was rarely cited in court cases. It seemed to be forgotten, overshadowed by the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Then came 1968. In Jones v. Alfred H. Mayer Co., the Supreme Court revived the 13th Amendment. The case involved a Black couple denied the chance to buy a house because of their race. The court ruled that the amendment empowered Congress to eliminate all badges and incidents of slavery, including racial discrimination in housing. This opened new possibilities. The amendment has been used to combat sex trafficking, protect migrant workers, and fight modern forms of forced labor. But the punishment for crime exception remains controversial. Today, millions of incarcerated Americans perform labor for little or no pay. Critics argue this continues the legacy of slavery. Some states pay prisoners as little as a few cents per hour, with up to 80% of wages withheld for various fees. In 2018, entertainer Kanye West called the penal labor exception a trap door and advocated for its removal. In 2020, lawmakers introduced resolutions to create a new amendment closing this loophole. The debate continues. Is prison labor rehabilitation or exploitation? Does it help people reintegrate into society, or does it perpetuate the systems of forced labor the amendment was meant to end? The 13th Amendment was the first constitutional change to directly govern private individuals, not just the government. It was the first to actively require freedom, not just restrict government power. Its passage marked a turning point in American history. The United States, a nation built partly on slavery, had finally abolished it. The amendment made clear that freedom was a fundamental American right, protected by the highest law of the land. But the story of the 13th Amendment is also a reminder that writing freedom into law doesn't automatically create equality. The amendment ended chattel slavery but couldn't end racism, discrimination, or economic exploitation. Understanding this history helps us recognize patterns that persist today. The criminalization of poverty and homelessness, mass incarceration, particularly of Black Americans, economic systems that trap people in cycles of debt and low wage, labor, the ongoing fight for civil rights and equal protection. The 13th Amendment represents both a triumph and an unfinished promise. It shows us how far we've come and how far we still need to go. Today, when we talk about freedom in America, we're still grappling with questions the 13th Amendment raised. What does true freedom mean? Is it just the absence of chains, or does it require economic opportunity, equal rights, and dignity? The amendment that ended slavery reminds us that the fight for freedom is never truly finished. Each generation must decide what freedom means and fight to protect it.